It was a dark and stormy night. Katie had just settled into bed, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She had locked all the doors and windows before going to bed, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was in the house. She lay there, frozen with fear, as she heard the creaking of footsteps on the stairs. The doorknob to her bedroom rattled and she held her breath, hoping that whoever it was would just go away. But the door swung open and a man stood in the doorway. Katie let out a scream as the man lunged towards her. She scrambled out of bed and ran for the door, but the intruder was too fast. He tackled her to the ground and Katie felt a sharp pain as a cloth was pressed over her mouth and nose. She struggled for a moment before everything went black. When she came to, she was tied to a chair in her own living room. The intruder, a man with cold, hard eyes, stood in front of her, a cruel smile on his face. He told her that if she cooperated and gave him what he wanted, he would let her live. Katie had no choice but to comply. The man ransacked her home, taking anything of value that he could find. And when he was finished, he untied Katie and fled into the night, leaving her trembling and alone. Katie never forgot the terror of that night and made sure to always keep her home well secured. She knew that she had been lucky to escape with her life and vowed to never let anyone. It was a dark and stormy night when I arrived at the Johnsons' house for my babysitting shift. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson were going out for the evening and had left me detailed instructions for their 3 children, who were all under the age of 10. Everything seemed normal at first. The children were well behaved and went to bed without any issues. But as the night went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The house was eerily quiet, and I kept hearing strange noises coming from the basement. I tried to dismiss my paranoia and focus on my tasks, but the noises only seemed to get louder and more frequent. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore and decided to investigate. As I made my way down to the basement, I heard a faint voice coming from behind a locked door. I hesitated for a moment, but my curiosity got the better of me and I fumbled with the doorknob until it finally opened. To my shock, I found Mrs. Johnson tied up and gagged on the floor. She looked at me with pleading eyes and I quickly untied her and called the police. It turned out that Mr. Johnson was involved in some illegal business dealings and was using the basement as a secret hideout. I was hailed as a hero for discovering the secret and rescuing Mrs. Johnson, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just stumbled upon something much bigger and more sinister than I could have ever imagined. There was a small, run-down apartment building on the edge of town that had a reputation for being haunted. No one knew for sure if the stories were true, but the rent was cheap and the tenants were desperate, so they didn't ask too many questions. The main problem with the building was apartment 3B. It had a strange energy about it that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up. The walls seemed to breathe, and the floorboards creaked in a way that sounded like footsteps. One night, a young couple moved into 3B, not knowing the history of the building. They settled in, trying to ignore the strange noises and the feeling of being watched. But as the days went by, things only got worse. The television would turn on and off by itself, and objects would disappear and reappear in different places. One night, the couple woke up to find their bedroom door wide open, even though they knew they had locked it before going to bed. As they lay in bed, frozen with fear, they heard the sound of someone walking down the hallway towards their room. They held their breath, hoping that the intruder would pass by, but the footsteps stopped right outside their door. Suddenly, the door swung open and a shadowy figure stood in the doorway. The couple screamed and scrambled out of bed, but as they tried to run, they found that their legs wouldn't move. They were frozen in place, unable to escape the terror that lurked in the darkness. In the end, the couple never made it out of apartment 3B alive. And to this day, the building remains abandoned, with the ghost of its haunted past still lurking within its walls. There was a creepy man in a van who seemed to appear out of nowhere. No one knew where he came from or what he was doing, but he was always lurking around town, watching and waiting. One day, a group of young children were playing in the park when they noticed the van parked on the street nearby. They had heard rumors about the man in the van, but they didn't believe he was real. They were curious, so they decided to go over and see for themselves. As they got closer, they could see that the van was old and run down, with tinted windows and a strange smell emanating from inside. They knocked on the door and called out, but there was no response. Suddenly, the door to the van opened and out stepped the creepy man. He was tall and thin, with dark, sunken eyes and a sinister smile on his face. The children froze in fear, not knowing what to do. The man grabbed one of the children and pulled them into the van, laughing maniacally as he did so. The other children screamed and ran away as fast as they could, not stopping, until they were safe at home. From that day on, the creepy man in the van was feared by everyone in the town. No one dared to go near him or his van, and the children were warned to stay away from him at all costs. Despite the fear he instilled in the community, the man in the van was never caught and remained a mysterious and unsettling presence in the town for many years. Karen had been single for a while and was feeling lonely, so she thought she would give the app a try. She set up her profile, added some nice photos of herself, and started swiping through the profiles of potential matches. She came across a man named Jack who seemed really interesting. He was smart, good-looking, and had a great sense of humor. Karen was excited to message him and see where things would go. They hit it off right away and started messaging each other frequently. Jack was charming and funny, and Karen felt like she had finally met someone special. They decided to meet up for a date at a local coffee shop. Karen was nervous, but also excited to finally meet Jack in person. When she arrived, she saw a man sitting at a table who looked nothing like his photos. He was much older and less attractive than she had expected. Karen was disappointed and felt like she had been tricked. She decided not to stay for the date and left the coffee shop as quickly as she could. She learned her lesson and decided to be more cautious when using dating apps in the future. She made sure to video chat with potential matches before meeting them in person and also did more research to verify their identity.